Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Product School Talk. Thanks again for everyone who tuned in during the last couple of days as we were live streaming for ProductCon. It was really awesome to have everybody there. Today we have a really special guest. His name is Jay Jump, and he is a product manager at a well-known nonprofit. So Jay, how are you doing today? Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Product School Talk. Just wait a couple seconds. Hi, Jay. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you here today. If you could please just tell everybody a little bit more about your background and how you got into product management.
Sure. I have been in the software world since I graduated college. I would be someone that you would consider moving from the business side into the technical side. I think it was because I had an interest in understanding business problems, but then also being very driven to find solutions for them. And it was just an interest of mine to take technology and apply it to business decisions. And we're just continuing to go into that world as time goes on. So technology is going to be an ever increasing part of the future of business. So I see those two interconnected. My background, I started in the for-profit side of things and worked for a couple of Fortune 500 companies, either as a part of a product team or leading product teams. And then I had my own personal desire to give back. And about 6 years ago, I made the switch to a not-for-profit organization where I brought that skill set into the charity realm. So I would say what we're going to talk about today is applicable in both worlds, in both scenarios. Charities have the same challenges that for-profit organizations do. And so it's a good blend of experiences from both of those worlds.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. And we look forward to your presentation. I'll give you a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds to start sharing so that we can prepare that. And guys, whenever he's finished presenting, we'll go ahead and open up the floor for Q&A. So you can type in your questions right in the comments and I'll take them whenever he's finished.
All right.
Jay, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
Great. Thank you. All right, great. Thanks, everyone. I've got my slides here on screen. This is a very simple presentation, and it's just a set of thoughts that I hope more than anything else are taken to spur conversation and spur thought. These are things that I have found coming up time and time again, regardless of what company I've worked for or whether I'm in the for-profit world or not-for-profit. They're just traps that tend to emerge over time. And when I started thinking about engaging with this community and thinking about what story I specifically could tell that I thought might add value, because I've gotten so much value out of other people's stories in this community, this was something that was important to me, is sharing what are some common problems that you're going to run into as you build a team, as a team matures and grows in size, and what have been some of the tactics that I've or my teams have found to work through those. So again, these aren't prescriptive by any means, and in our Q&A time, I would love to learn challenges to these or additions. And just want to underscore the point that this is really about generating a dialogue over being really prescriptive and right about how product management works. And that might be the most overarching theme of all, is that there is no set way for product management to work perfectly. So that being said, I'm going to jump in and we'll just go through these. Okay, the first one is something that I've labeled binary thinking. And I mean, it's this or that thinking, it's black or white. An example that I thought of recently was we realized an opportunity in a market, an audience segment, and we started having conversations about what type of concept we wanted to deploy. And we did what a lot of companies and a lot of teams do, is you pull information and data and you try to get as much information as you possibly can to make that decision. By the 6th week of scheduling meetings, and you've got very important people in the organization, it's hard to get their time on calendar. We still hadn't arrived at a conclusion. And after reconvening with my team, we looked at it like we're trying to make a decision between two concepts that we feel both are pretty good. Why don't we test both? And we put together a plan to pilot both concepts in less than the amount of time that it had taken us up to that point, just to continue the debate about which one of those two concepts had more merit. And so we proposed that and pitched, let's just go in the market with both of these concepts and get the learnings back and then make our decision from there. And that reinforced something that I think is important around, moving past binary thinking. It's just this inertia that, is true not just of product teams, but just organizations in general, but it has certain effects on product teams. So we decided in that situation to be directionally strategic, which is we still feel like this audience segment we need to pursue with some type of product offering, and we moved into it with two smaller pilots versus putting a whole strategy around one of the two of those. The end result was we actually learned that both products had a lot of appeal for the market, but one had a greater ability to scale, and we wouldn't have learned that had we not actually gotten experience from the real world. So what I say here is, be directionally strategic. Don't worry about getting something perfectly right, or be afraid of getting something wrong and failing. Be more concerned about, are you being directionally strategic? If you don't, you will sacrifice speed and getting those learnings that are going to help you make good product decisions by, spending all your time trying to make that decision on paper. So that's one thing that I feel really strongly about. Being directionally strategic manifests itself in a lot of ways. And hopefully that's something that you all feel like you can apply in a lot of different ways. But just reinforcing that helps you get out of that rut and that inertia of you've got to make the right choice. Another area that I have personally experienced in my career, and then my colleagues and friends and other organizations go through this as well, is the more is better bias. If more process worked and gave us this benefit, then adding on more is even better. And that applies to structure and rules and role descriptions. And it's a very dangerous balance to try to strike. The way that I look at it is try to apply enough process to give you what you want, but enough is best. More is not necessarily better. And that sounds very cryptic, and in some ways it is, but it's intended to be that. Netflix has an interesting approach to dealing with growing as a team size and your product growing in complexity. And I encourage you to take a look at this. If you just Google Netflix culture document. In that slide deck, it talks about dealing with chaos and dealing with complexity in organizations. The way to deal with it, according to their philosophy, is not to add more rules. More rules attracts different types of people. And what you really want to do is encourage and try to attract the type of people that are comfortable dealing with complexity. And I found that this is something that seems to occur, at least in product teams that I've been a part of, around Agile. Agile is at its core a set of principles that help you make decisions about how to run your team. I have seen a tendency of a lot of teams, and even some that I've been on, try to get really prescriptive in how they apply the principles of Agile. The example that I can think of is with estimation. A couple of years ago, we were just our velocity as a team and throughput was all over the place. We weren't doing a good job at forecasting. And so we went down the path of trying to get better at estimating our work. And this is the enough is best philosophy. We got to a point where, and I think the technical term is calling this reference class forecasting. So what that really means in simple terms is if I know that this piece of development work or this piece of work is kind of like that one that I did, and I know how long that one took me, then I can comparatively understand how long it's going to take me to get this work done. And so that became a tool that we used as a team to decide what we were going to work on. And it ended up working really well. And we got a lot of productivity out of taking that approach. I think we carried it, we kind of got that feeling of, well, let's add more processes in. This was so great. Let's start putting in a lot of different rituals and a lot of, and what we realized that after a few weeks, we'd gone too far. So what I say here is don't lose sight of the principles that guide you trying to perfect the process. It's always better to optimize where you need to, but it's easy to get swept up in trying to implement a full host of practices and principles that frankly may not be applicable to your team. So every team is different and every team has different skill sets, and I would caution product managers to not assume or not fall into the trap of adding more is necessarily better. This is more of a recent learning. I'm at a point now where I'm doing a lot of new product development in new market, and that inherently involves more risk and taking more chances. And in the last 2 years, our team has had some products that have done spectacularly well and some that have struggled to grow in adoption. So part of our journey in that is just learning when to let something sunset or take the learnings and move on to the next thing. But that's another webinar. In some of our products that did not perform as well as we had hoped, there became this notion of, I heard this phrase said so many times, well, the customers just didn't want that, or, well, it's just obvious that's not our strong suit, or it's just clear that we weren't meant to be in this line of business. And I think big organizations, especially, the speed at which organizations move, like they want a simple answer. We want a simple answer. I want a simple answer when things don't go right. I could tell you from experience, that's never the case. It is rarely straightforward, black and white, that something, failed because a customer didn't want it, or, your channel strategy was not right. And it takes extra time to try to really uncover what the truth is. And so what the slide says here is truth is more complicated than a survey. And a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this myself, taking solace in, well, what went wrong? Well, you survey people. The problem with surveys is you ask people something, you're going to get an answer. It's always better, in my opinion, to look at their actions and understand what they did, and that's more important than what they said. So you have to be comfortable living in the gray. And I think that, I mentioned this one is kind of a new learning in the last 2 years since I moved into more new product development, which has more risk. you've just got to be comfortable living in that gray space where you may not always exactly know until you do a good postmortem of your product. And on the flip side, I think it's equally as important if you have a product that does really well to try to dive in and understand why it went really well, because this bias cuts both ways. You can falsely ascribe success of a product to how smart you are or how great your team executed, and really miss the truth and why something did really well. So I could give more examples on that. I have lots to share, but I hope that one makes sense. And again, like, it was something that's kind of new and really fits into new product and risk. This one, new wine, old wineskins. There's a similar theme here, and it's our, I call these biases because biases are, what we as people want to, make simple decisions. We want our life to be easy and manageable, and so we come up with that is the essence of what biases are. And this one to me manifests itself in, well, we did this over here with this team. Let's do it over here, and it doesn't work exactly the same way that it worked over here. And the specific example that I'm thinking of is an internal example of embedding product team, embedding technical resources within a business development unit. We did that very successfully in one instance, and accelerated our development around a new product. And that became like a really functional model for this particular group. Another group in the organization wanted to replicate that, and they essentially, just picked up the exact same plan and tried to implement it, right down the line. A couple of months into it, there were just all kinds of problems. The team wasn't communicating. There was misunderstanding about, what the project scope was. And I was called in to take a look and understand why that was the case. And, I was asking fundamental questions like, who is ultimately the decision maker? Who would you consider the product manager in this case? Okay, does that product manager know everything about the market, and are they empowered to make the decisions? And as you can imagine, the answers to all those questions were, well, no, that's this person. Or another example was, are they all co-located? Are they sitting in the same physical space? Well, no, we didn't do that either. So it was all the same on paper, but it lacked the underlying fundamental principles that made the first version of that test successful. And that was really what's important about it, was giving the right people the empowerment, co-locating them, and then making it clear what their collective goal was. But that wasn't inserted into the second iteration. It was really just trying to mimic what was done with the first. So when you have something new and successful that works, I think it's important to not just take that on face value that it works because it'll work everywhere. I think you have to take every instance on its own merit and try to apply those principles. And you could say, I gave you an example of working internally, but the same thing applies to your product and your customers. I mean, if you have something that's successful with one audience segment, it's not necessarily true that it will apply to other segments. So make sure you study and understand and know what makes a product or process successful. And then operationalization, I call that the overreaction to success. You put a new product out, whether it's an internal product or it's an external product, and it does really well, that increases your demand. People want more of it. They want more of your services. They want more of your team. They want to know if your team can do other things for them or build other instances. And you create this just influx of demand onto your team. And I feel like sometimes that throws the needle over into a lot of operational heavy work Well, the first thing is you definitely have to be prepared for that. I would encourage everyone that's, maybe on the early side of the product lifecycle, or if you're managing a portfolio, like be prepared for that to happen. I've seen teams that I have left, looking back to where they are now after I started them and launched products to where they are now, they're maybe 20% of what they used to be in terms of innovation and new development. And I talked to a lot of those product managers, and they're like, yes, it's just, cranking out operational work. My response to that and how I've tried to build teams and structure teams is this philosophy of getting 10% better every year. I don't know how that looks in other organizations. I know Google is famous for their 20% rule, but we try to live by every single year. Let's try to make our product 10% better, and that work has to find its way in, and it is just as important as any other operational work that comes in alongside it. So every 5 years, we try to make sure by that 10% investment that we essentially have a new product. So over 5 years, if you're 10% better, it's a 50% different product, which technically means it's something new and different. So that is something that we commit to. And I think the reason why we do that is to make sure that we never stop chasing our customer. Otherwise, you end up with something that is stagnant and really bogs your team down. And that can also be a morale killer as well, when creative people, talented product managers and designers and developers end up working themselves into an operational role. My experience has been that they tend not to like that. So those are my 5 product biases, some quick examples and some ways that I mitigate those. It was really, fun to share that, and I'm curious to know what questions or thoughts or challenges. And again, I can't stress enough, this is a conversation starter more than it is a prescriptive set of rules.
Awesome, Jay. Thank you so much for the presentation. Excuse me. We have a few questions that were coming in from Slack, but let's see if somebody wants to type in a question here on Facebook, and we'll get to those as well. Cool. So Jay, can you share some of the skills that you feel has helped you along the way, specifically when you were launching your career in product?
Sure. I think I guess I would say I'm a lean startup and user-centered design practitioner. Those are extraordinarily helpful, and I think helped me start to grow in my career. I definitely felt like there was a fork in the road of, the product management function being more like project management, where it's kind of task driven. And those two disciplines gave me a lot of insight on why it's important to understand your market and like let that be the most important thing that you understand. Smart people typically figure out how to get things done, but it's not easy to understand your customer and create products that delight them. And those two things in particular were really helpful.
Awesome, thank you. And our next question comes from Edward. As a nonprofit, how do your stakeholders change?
Oh man, that's a great question. On one hand, they don't, because it's a business, and a lot of people are, I think, mildly surprised when I talk about our business. Like it's a business. It's P&Ls, it's strategy, it's focus, it's understanding your market. We have all the same challenges. I think what is honestly different is the passion around mission, and that works its way into the culture in a really unique way. And I'm not saying that if you're in the for-profit, you can't be passionate, but people tend to move towards in my experience, move towards a charity or a not-for-profit out of like some personal connection or passion, and that can work its way into fighting for an idea or advocating for a solution in a certain way. So the simple way to put that is it shows up with a lot of passion behind your work, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful thing, but I can see where it would be a bit stronger in that industry.
That's right.
Our next question is from Cecilia. How do you transition from marketing and advertising into product marketing? So can you talk a little bit about that, if you have any experience or feedback on that?
The experience that I have, I'll be perfectly candid, is working with my colleagues in marketing and advertising, and that's a significant part of our job, and talking to people who have asked the same question of me. So what I have said is I think it's really important to have technical chops. On the one hand, I think marketing and advertising resources, and again, this is all through the lens of Jay and my experience, they inherently get that connection to the customer. I mean, that's what marketing is trying to identify, what resonates. So that is like spot on. And I've learned from, my marketing teams that I've worked with, where I think the hurdle is, I've grown up in the technical world and knowing those processes. I started out, in waterfall, and then, organically lived through the transition to Agile. So I have this whole vocabulary and this whole body of knowledge that's just innate to me, that helps. And I encourage people like yourself to try to get that learning, go to W3C schools or, take courses. It's not that difficult, and it will help you significantly. You're coming into it with an advantage that a lot of technical product managers don't.
Awesome, thank you. And we have time for maybe one more question here. So this is from Prasad. As a product manager, how much time do you spend with the engineering and design teams versus working on thinking about new features or new offerings, market validation, things like that? I'll give
two answers. I am in a leadership role now, and so more of my time is spent, maybe 80%, connecting with businesses, trying to map out new opportunities. And I have a team of product managers. When I was at the product manager level, I like 50 to 70% of time spent with engineers and GUI designers, GUI developers, which I think is really, really, really important. That relationship has to be really rock solid. There's got to be a lot of trust. And again, in my experience, allowing them to share their insight into the product building process. If you want to get the type of buy-in that you need to have a good product, they need to feel like they're invested in it as well. So I'm not a believer in, there's a wall between, engineers and designers and then the rest of the business. I think the product manager needs to facilitate the collaboration between the two. So when I was a product manager, I spent a lot of my days with my engineering and technical team, but that's a little bit different now.
Awesome, thank you. And thanks for sharing the presentation today and for your insights. Before we let you go, could you please share your advice or any advice that you might have for aspiring product managers?
Yeah, never stop learning. I genuinely believe that in the future, having a technical acumen and understanding how to apply technology in the business is going to be just fundamental for getting into leadership. I see a future where leaders of organizations are kind of expected to have whether you're in HR or marketing, just a basic understanding of technology. So it's an exciting field to be in. And what I think is so fantastic about it is that you get exposure to all aspects of the business. So my number one core piece of advice, specific to Never Stop Learning, is learn about the different areas. Like you need to be a generalist and understand how whatever company you work for, how they work, what's their business model, what's the value proposition. And the more that you can speak to that and understand that, the better you're going to be as a product manager, and the more opportunities are going to open up for you in your career.
Definitely agree. Thank you again, too. Appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who joined us. To get more information about us, you can go to productschool.com, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good day. Thanks, Jay.
Cool. Thank you.